Catherine@fairbankstudios.com, or you can message me through Eventbrite and we can talk that way. But Create Fearlessly is just kind of my tagline, and what I mean by that is I try to foster a community of people that aren't afraid to create. So let's get started with the actual content. Today I really wanted to cover a couple of things. I'm going to mess with this Zoom layout in a minute because it's being weird and I can't see things on my screen. But we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. We're going to talk about the expanding concept of interaction, because as our technology has evolved, our expanding concept of interaction has as well. The definition of user experience, whether or not a user experience can actually be designed, components of UX, what user experience is not, kinds of interaction in UX, service experience, and the bottom line, why should we care? What's the big deal with UX and that sort of thing. So really basic, we're just covering some really basic topics on UX. This is definitely nothing too crazy or advanced or out there. I want to make this information digestible and easy to understand for all of you. So for this first section, we are going to be talking about the expanding concept of interaction. This is the notion that interaction in the context of UX has continued to evolve from a human and computer working together to accomplish a goal to being a very broad term referring to a wide variety of communication and collaboration between a human and an artifact in an ecology. In the study of UX design, and ecology is the entire set of surrounding parts of the world, including networks, other users, devices, information structures, with which a user, product, or system interacts. So we'll be talking about ecology throughout this presentation because it is the basis for what we're designing for. We're designing for human and artifact in an ecology. So I wanted to move on and show you guys this. So this is kind of, I mean, it's a really basic little graphic. It's just your human and artifact interaction. The user experience is the totality of effects felt by the user as a result of the interaction. So it's not just the variations of devices or artifacts that have changed over time, but it's the nature of interaction itself. For example, in the early 90s, interaction primarily happened on desktops where we were either at home or we were at work. The nature of interaction was primarily with the keyboard, mouse, and monitor. Then interaction extended to handheld devices like mobile phones and pagers. Then they evolved into screens with a stylus, if you guys remember those. And then came touch smartphones and tablets. So now we're using our fingers for the majority of our work on, touch screens, keyboards, and the mouse and everything is still in existence. But you can see a couple of those devices on the screen here. And the combination of modes of interaction with these devices vary from finger touches, scroll wheels, buttons, and voice commands. I mean, my watch, I can use voice commands now, which is pretty cool. And then on this next slide, the expanding concept of interaction, part 2, kind of. An interaction artifact is a system, device, service, instrument, mechanism, object, or environment that can communicate with a human in either or both directions. So I'm going to check this little chat box here for a second. Oh my gosh, why can't I see my mouse on this thing? Sorry, I'm like learning about Zoom. There we go. Okay, good. I'm just making sure. So we're going to play the slideshow again. I don't want to lose anybody, although now this is blocking everybody. Okay, so I'll get the hang of this Zoom thing in the future for sure. But anyway, so we're going back to the concept of interaction. So artifacts include a lot of things. Your building that you're in, the room you're in, the chair you're sitting in, kitchens, an ATM, an elevator, all these things that you see here. Because interaction is so broad and pervasive in our world, good UX design it will have a positive impact on our lives if it's good, right? Because we can't live without it. We're gonna have to experience things that people have designed for other people. So the definition of UX, the two letters UX are a popular acronym that stand for user experience. Those two letters stand for the whole practice, all the work that is done in this field, and the final user experience that comes out of that work. So I'm taking the definition of UX from the experts in the field, right? So, I mean, my favorite textbook on UX of all time is the UX Book 2 by Rex Hartson and Parda Pila names, but also from the Nielsen Norman Group, and just like the people that you would consider the leading experts in UX design. That's where I'm taking my definitions from. And I have some of my resources at the end for you guys to look at if you would like. But I wanted to distinguish UX from a couple of other definitions you might see pretty often, such as UI. UI design is usually considered more about visual design, and UX is more about interaction design. So some literature refers to UI as visual design, and UX is more of the stuff that comes before the visual, before you know, kind of the architecture and the paint on top of it and that sort of thing. Often the look, feel, and emotional aspects of a given UI are seen as the responsibility of a visual designer. But in the general public, the terms UI, HCI, and UX are often used interchangeably, so it makes things a little confusing, especially when you're looking for jobs in the UX field, so we'll get to that in a second. I also want to cover the difference between HCI and UX. HCI stands for human-computer interaction and refers to the whole field of study. This term is mostly used now in reference to the academic side. And I hope I'm not talking too fast. I hope that all of this is making sense. Definitely let me know in the chat if you want me to slow down. At the end, I'll ask you guys questions, or you guys can ask me questions, and we can cover anything that maybe was a little unclear. But I think so far this is pretty basic stuff at the beginning here. So HCI stands for human-computer interaction, and it refers to the whole field of study. The term is mostly used now in reference to the academic side. And UX is more the popular term for HCI, practice of HCI in the field. So searching for jobs, I wanted to cover this just briefly. Honestly, I could probably do a whole seminar just on this topic because it's so, I mean, I'm sure other job fields have the same problem where you just have so many terms that basically mean the same thing, although I don't really know other job fields. But in terms of UX design, it can be difficult to kind of navigate. I mean, you see up here, like these are even some really big brand names that a ton of people have heard of. Product designer, visual communications designer, senior interaction designer, like all of these have, I mean, even with the visual communications designer, if you click on that job title in LinkedIn, it says looking for someone with UX experience. Like UX is in their little description, but it's not in the title of their job posting. So really labels don't mean a lot when you are looking for a job in the UX field. And so it's hard to navigate all these job titles. So I would suggest not becoming familiar with some of these words that you see a lot if you're looking for a UX design job, but not letting that be the end all be all. Definitely look in the description of the job, and then also ask good questions in your interviews. So I wanted to just talk about a couple examples of my own experience with this. I had a phone interview with a company for a product design position once. I didn't get the job because I wasn't a true product designer. My job title at the time was UX designer. And the thing was, product design, as they described it, was exactly the kind of work I was doing already as a UX designer, which was designing products for websites and mobile apps and that sort of thing. And the truth is, employers have their own distinctions between labels like UX, UI, product, architect, designer, and even developer. I've seen postings where someone's looking for a UI developer, but they're really not looking for someone to code much. They're mostly looking for someone to make things look better and have better user friendliness. And I mean, there was another time just this past week where a recruiter called me from a big corporation and said there was a UX position available and asked if I was interested. And I told her I already had a job and I wasn't interested. But then she asked me what the difference was between UI and UX. And so a lot of times with these recruiters, they don't know much about the field that they're recruiting for. They don't know what UX is. They are just given a list of requirements and things to search for on LinkedIn, and they don't have knowledge about what the actual difference is between UX and UI. So yeah, that's my general advice when it comes to applying for UX positions and my kind of personal experience. Moving on. So I did want to cover a little bit of history with you guys about the rise of UX. Here's a little mini history lesson. It's a very condensed version because we can cover this in more depth in later seminars if this is something you're interested in. But early large mainframe computers of the pre-consumer era were used to run large, expensive enterprise software systems, and users were trained to use a system for specific business purposes. Interaction was via these punch cards that you see here, this kind of yellow one in the middle, paper tape like this blue tape you see at the bottom, paper printouts, and there really were no system development considerations of usability or UX. The product was designed and people were expected to be trained on how to use it to complete their tasks. Here's some early computers, personal computers. When personal computers put computing on a business user's desk and the consumer movement put computing in people's houses, customer service started to discover that the expanding of the marketplace to the average consumer without an adequate understanding of how the products are being used had a major impact on support costs. So people were getting these computers and saying, what the heck is this? How do I use this? Help me, to these companies selling these things. And when personal computers were introduced, the average consumer, became a huge burden on the customer support staff and on training, and it became clear that we couldn't just rely on training everybody anymore. We needed to design our products in a way that was user-friendly. So what is user experience? User experience is the totality of the effects felt by the user before, during, and after interaction with a product or system in an ecology. That word ecology is back again. Key characteristics of a user experience reflected in the definition above are: it is a result of interaction, it is about the totality of effects, it is felt internally by the user, and it includes usage, context, and ecology. So we're going to continue here and go a little bit in depth about the totality of effects of interaction. I've said that phrase a couple of times at this point. I wanted to talk to you guys about how interaction between a human and a designed artifact can be direct, for example, operating on a device and getting feedback, or indirect, feeling the effect of seeing and thinking about an artifact. The effects of interaction include the user's entire stream of perceptions, interpretations of those perceptions, and the resulting emotions during an encounter with the system. That totality of effects of interaction includes the influence of usability, usefulness, and emotional impact during physical interaction, and the full unfolding of these effects over time. As an example of effects over time, consider a potential user researching a product or system, such as the Whopper, the Impossible Whopper, seeing advertising and reviews, and anticipating ownership. So this happened somewhat recently in 2019, and so I wanted to kind of use the Impossible Whopper as a good example. So maybe this is something you saw advertising for, you read reviews on before trying it. The next step in that process is to buy the product. The effects of buying that product then include the product packaging and the out-of-box experience, seeing, touching, and thinking about the product, admiring the product. Not that you would really admire the Whopper, you probably would just eat it. Using it and retaining or savoring or not the pleasure of eating this burger. The next phase of that is a little bit more abstract, but it's the user's feeling about the company that produced that product, the reputation and branding surrounding that product, and the pride of owning that product, which I don't know if there's much pride in buying a burger from Burger King, but when you think about something like owning a nice car, pride of ownership makes a little bit more sense. Or owning, a luxury good or handbag or something like that. So clearly, it is the user that has the experience. Therefore, user experiences from an interaction under the same conditions can vary across individual users. This can also change depending on the context in which a user comes in contact with the product. For example, at work versus at home. Within these contexts, there can be multiple specific usage contexts. for example, a stressful work environment compared to being at home and being relaxed and that sort of thing. So when it comes to the Whopper, you might, when it comes to this part of the interaction, you might feel like you are saving money by going and getting a burger that is pretty cheap. You go into a fast food place, you might feel a sense of convenience, and you might also feel, with the Impossible Whopper, it is kind of catered towards people that want to eat less meat. So you might take that to give yourself a feeling of maybe caring for the environment or caring for the animals or, veganism or something like that. So that's just an example of what that particular product might have, how that product might have an effect on a person. But it's going to be individual. It's going to be based on each individual's own experiences that have led them to interacting with this product. So UX design, and I'm going to check the chat real quick. I wish I knew how to check it without getting away from my screen, but I just want to make sure that you guys are okay and you're not losing me. But I wanted to talk about UX design, which haven't been talking about already, but also kind of flowing in from my last point about how the experience is individual. Can a user experience truly be designed if experiences with products and systems happen internally with the user? When we talk about designing a user experience, you can't design something that occurs internally. So phrases like UX design don't quite make sense, but I hope that I think we all just kind of take the UX design phrase and use it to understand that this means we're designing for the user experience and not so it's a little bit of a weird phrase, but it's what we use to describe this job. So the importance of UX. There's no longer any real distinction between business strategy and the design of user experience. Businesses around the world are coming to realize that UX has become a mission-critical consideration for companies in every industry and of every shape and size. And I know that sometimes we have managers and stuff that don't quite agree, but I'll be showing some examples later in this presentation that I think will, if you're not already convinced that UX is important, these things will convince you. So I want to show a quick video if we have time for it. I don't know, we're running a little bit low on time, so I think I will send this link to you guys instead. But it's just it's from Don Norman, who's a thought leader in the world of UX. And I wanted to include this clip because it talks about how bad UX and UI caused an exorbitant amount of money for these businesses. And it can also cost lives. So in this particular instance, and I thought this was very relevant considering the pandemic that's happening around us, I know that the medical domain is top of mind for all of us right now, and this is a place where UX designers are essential. In hospitals, the need for good UX is perhaps even more compelling with respect to the effects of safety in everyday operation. The Dr. Norman is a user advocate and principal of the Neilman Norman Group, and he talks about ways that we can, as designers, improve systems in hospitals. So it's pretty important, and UX is definitely something that needs to always be, it's essential to any business, in my opinion. So moving on, the components of UX. In this section, we will cover the components of UX, including usability, usefulness, emotional impact, and meaningfulness. So these are the components of UX. I've taken these components from the UX book 2, which is, I think I already mentioned, but it's my favorite UX textbook on the topic of UX. And I like the way that it breaks it down here. I think it covers everything. We can relate these components to the experience of eating at a restaurant. Usability is the productivity, efficiency, ease of use, and learnability of a product or system. We can see the usability of our meal in terms of practical considerations. For example, do we have a spoon to eat our soup with or a knife to cut our steak with? Usefulness is the ability to use a system or product to accomplish goals of work. The usefulness at a meal at a restaurant can be reckoned in terms of nutritional effectiveness and satiety levels. Emotional impact is the effective component of user experience and user feelings and user satisfaction. Is the dining ambiance nice? Was our waitress friendly? What about the way our food looks on the plate? Meaningfulness is the long-term personal relationship the user has with the product. Maybe we had such a good time at this restaurant that we can't wait to come back, and over the next several years we come back regularly for special occasions and come to associate birthdays with this restaurant. So I also wanted to cover what UX design is not. While UX is becoming more and more established part of the technology world, there are some misconceptions and mischaracterizations that still linger. So what is UX not? It is not just a diagnostic view. There's no longer any real distinction between business strategy and the design of the user experience. In the early days of usability, many companies had large software engineering teams along with a small pool of human factors experts. These human factors experts are like what UX designers were before they were UX designers. That was like the first role that had any kind of relationship to the UX designer role. And they would get loaned out briefly to a project team, usually at the end of a project, at which time they were expected to perform usability testing. But at this point in the project, there was no time or resources left to fix any non-cosmetic problems with a product. UX involves involvement throughout the entirety of a product development lifecycle, which much of the work in the beginning stages in research and product design. And I'm going to show you guys an example of why that's so important. So this is a Black & Decker snake light. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this product. I'm pretty sure my dad had one of these. But UX is not just evaluating an existing product and improving it or running out of time. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're no longer, I don't know if you guys saw that, but Zoom just gave me a little pop-up that said we don't have a 40-minute limit anymore. I don't know if that's like a, I don't know what that's about, but that's great because we might go over the 40-minute mark here. So that's fantastic. So the snake light. UX is not just about evaluating an existing product and improving it or dressing things up in a pretty skin. It's not just about making things pretty. And this is why. This is the Black & Decker snake light. It's a flexible flashlight that looks a little bit like a snake. You can change its shape so it stands up by itself on a workbench, under a sink, or around your neck, like this gentleman in the picture here. To come up with this concept, the Black & Decker did usage research before doing any design. They observed large numbers of flashlight users to see what they used flashlights for and how they used them. And they quickly discovered that people who use flashlights to see better while they were doing these tasks usually needed to have their hands free in order to actually do the task. All right, why is this not working? All right, cool. If they had instead taken a diagnostic view, they would have looked at a typical flashlight, like the one on the left here, and fixed all the problems they could find with the design, but they never would have thought of something totally new like the snake light. So that's why you can't just take an existing product and paint it blue and put some pretty swirls on it and call that UX. So 1.6, the kinds of interaction and UX. Different types of interaction with different kinds of user experiences, localized interaction, activity-based interaction, and system-spanning interaction. So not all interactions is for a particular task between a user and a GUI or graphical user interface for something like adding an item to a calendar. Some interactions continue through lots of different states in time and space and through different environments. Instead of just one-off exchange, an interaction can be about a transaction that spans a system and expands into a series of exchanges and encounters over a long span of time. We've identified these 3 different types of interaction with different kinds of user experiences, and we'll go over those right now. So localized interaction. Localized interaction is localized with respect to both time and the system. It is a simple interaction with a single product, one device in the, what? Make sure you guys are on mute. It is a simple interaction with a single product, one device, and the user's ecology surrounding the user. Remember, an ecology is the world of the device, systems, communications, etc. It's task-oriented, it's bounded, it's limited, and it occurs in a very short time within one interaction environment and with a one single goal, such as using an ATM to withdraw cash. An activity-based interaction is interaction in the context of one or more task threads, a set of or possibly multiple sequences of multiple overlapping and related tasks, often evolving into more than one device and an ecology. So an example of this is that it can involve interaction, sorry, I'm scanning my notes. So an example of this is online shopping, right? So you might search for a new coffee maker to purchase online. You might follow a few links to read reviews on the coffee maker, on a couple of coffee makers, maybe you're on Amazon. Then you might decide on one, put it in your cart, and then you're going to follow links to other similar products you might need in addition to the coffee maker. Maybe you need filters, coffee filters, maybe you need ground coffee or coffee beans to put in your coffee maker. So that is an activity-based interaction because there's multiple steps and they're kind of overlapping to form one user experience. System spanning interaction. So this interaction is across devices and a user's ecology. System spanning interaction is a kind of activity-based interaction, but it's often involving multiple parties in multiple work/play roles, multiple devices, and multiple locations. So I'll give you an example of what a system spanning interaction is. So here's an example. And this is taken straight from the textbook, from the UX Book 2 textbook. Let's look at this transaction, and it's got a relatively simple goal of getting electric power service restored to a user who finds the power is out in his house. The activity begins with our user calling his neighbor. The neighbor says his power is out too, and he thinks a power line is down in his neighborhood. Our user then calls the power company and asks, can this be fixed? And the customer service person puts in a work order in the queue in a central database with an account number, a customer name, a phone number, and address. Customer service also sends a text to a technician in the field who checks the queue on his iPad or portable tablet and picks up the work order and hops in his truck and then drives to the neighborhood. He and his crew fix the power lines, and then he reports the job as done on his tablet. The customer is happy. Customer has his lights back on. From this example, you can see an ecology involved one user activity that includes the user as a customer, the power company, its customer service, customer account, the power company's central database, a work order queue, a work order, power company field technicians, and power lines. The ecology of this activity also includes the telephone system, the neighbor on his phone, a text message, the tablet that the technician uses. There's all of these things that are part of this experience, and the user's workflow is a continuum across the ecology, and information pervasiveness or shareability and accessibility across the whole ecology is the glue that ties these different subsystems within the ecology. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I'm gonna take a drink of my soda here. We'll go back so you guys can see the illustration. But yeah, I mean, that's something that's pretty common, right? Like anytime we have a problem, I mean, this example is a very real life example of something that might happen that involves all of these steps, but it is one user experience. And as UX designers, you might be tasked with, you know, a part of this user experience that affects all of it. For example, maybe your job is to design that application on that tablet, but that affects the whole experience that is set up here. So if you were set up with the task of creating that application for that tablet, you would also need to consider this whole flow and outliers as well. I mean, maybe the you know, maybe there's like some variations to this flow that might not be exactly this one. You want to develop your design so that it can account for not just the typical user experience, but also the outliers as well. So that kind of leads me into service experience. Service design is UX design for a customer or user experience within a transactional journey. So I've got my lovely bartender here. And service experience is about applying the principles of UX towards a customer's experience of buying something or receiving some service. It's about the customer touch points in the user experience journey. It usually involves a storytelling narrative of a UX experience, distributed over time and often distributed over different locations. For example, the service experience of a patient going to a hospital for elective surgery could involve their arrival experience, checking in and going through lines, getting processed, etc. Illustrated here is an example of a journey map, which is a tool in UX that can help us define and illustrate points in a customer's journey. So yeah, this is just an example of like a tool you might use to illustrate something like this. If you are asked to design a customer's experience. Usually, in my experience, I've never, well, you could design something from scratch, but usually you're asked to improve upon an existing experience, right? Unless you're like, because even companies like Uber, right? Like when they designed their experience, it's not like that wasn't based on anything. That was kind of based off of like the taxi industry. So you're always going to be basing your designs on something. So you'll have an existing user experience and then you want to kind of build on that and improve it. So we're getting towards the end here if you guys have any questions, but I do have one more section to cover, and that is why should we care? I wanted to talk to you guys about the business case for UX. If you don't have a convincing business case for UX, you really have to conclude that although it might be interesting, at the end of the day, UX is just an academic exercise. But we all know that's not true. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's not true. So, is the fuss over usability real? UX has penetrated most corporate and organizational development groups and projects. We don't have to defend UX and usability anymore because UX has penetrated most corporate and organizational development groups and projects. You can see evidence of this when you consider the rise of companies like Apple. I mean, there's more to this. Obviously, it's even easy for me to sit here and say, you know, we don't need to convince everyone that UX is important. It's pretty obvious. But I mean, people used to do things like cost analysis and stuff like that and like see if, hey, are we saving money for this company by doing X, Y, and Z? Did we save money here and there by improving the user experience? And while I think that data is valuable, it's really sometimes not trackable because UX is supposed to be brought in at the very beginning of processes. And so it can be hard to wrap your brain around, okay, well, if we had done this really poorly, if we had done our job bad and we had, you know, just done everything with really poor UX, how much less money would we have made? You know, you can't always measure the benefits of UX in like that practical, qualitative way or quantitative way, I should say. But I think you can see a lot of the examples we covered, you can see how bad UX is really bad and might, you know, result in the loss of life or inconvenience at best, a loss of life at worst. And yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say on that and where you guys see, what you guys think is the best argument to make when someone comes at you with that whole question of, you know, why is UX so important? And that's kind of the end of my presentation. I felt like I really sped through that, and we could have probably watched that video. I can go back and we can watch it if you would like, but those are kind of my thoughts on the topic of what is UX and what is UX design, and this was really fun. Also, I wanted to mention I am a full-time UX designer. I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, but yeah, that's kind of my qualifications for talking about this. But I'll open you guys' questions in the chat box and we can continue this conversation.